Welcome to ASP Stuff Radio, the internet radio show where we talk about the flaws of humanity, the origins of the so-called magic wand-do, and interesting cat facts. For example, a cat's purr is 26 hertz, a frequency that can lower blood pressure and reduce the risk of heart disease. So if your heart is ailing, surround yourself with hundreds of cats. You'll also live longer. Today is Friday, July 5th. The day after Independence Day, when the 13 American colonies told the British monarchy to shove it. I'm your host and wannabe special counsel, Alberotle. Stevocrates and Pauleto are on assignment and will hopefully return by popular demand in episode number 71. Today's episode is the conclusion of the 4-part series and deep dive analysis of the corrupt foundation of Russiagate, or the Alberotle Report. Part 4 will focus on 2 unfortunate tragedies that barely received any serious nationwide media coverage that occurred months before the 2016 U.S. presidential election, and questions the core allegation that Russians hacked the DNC servers and stole files, providing them to WikiLeaks. I will also focus on the recent arrest of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, election interference, and whether a Trump presidency would have benefited Russia if we assume that the country was behind the compromised DNC servers. After all, the allegation was that they rigged the election in favor of Trump. But first, if you enjoyed this special episode or any of our previous episodes, please help support our small independent podcast on our website, aspstuffradio.com, or directly at paypal.me/aspstuffradio donate. Your contributions will help us keep producing more informative and entertaining stuff for your listening pleasure. Thank you for your support. Part 12. The Missing Link. The final segment of the Alberotle Report will conclude with the murder of Seth Rich, a computer voting specialist of the Democratic National Committee, and the arrest of Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks. Although I believe these 2 controversial events are essential pieces to the scandalous Russiagate puzzle, determining how they fit remains a mystery, leaving key questions still unanswered from the 2016 presidential election. Seth Rich, a former employee of the Democratic National Committee since 2014, was the director of voter expansion data, or as he would describe himself, quote, an impassioned data analyst, unquote. A year before the 2016 election, Rich attended the 2015 Election Data Summit and expressed his concerns about ballot integrity before a panel of Election Commission officials in a forum that was captured on video.
Excuse me, Seth Rich with the DNC. I think several of you have spoken about provisional ballots and rejected ballots. I guess we've looked at, as an outside practitioner with a vested interest in training our voters, how do we get better access to data that tells us why ballots are rejected, why ballots are cast as provisional, so that we can analyze that and then develop better training guides?
To reiterate, Seth asked, I think some of you had spoken about provisional ballots and rejected ballots. I guess we have looked at, as an outside practitioner with a vested interest in training our voters, how do we get better access to data that tells us why ballots are rejected, why ballots are cast as provisional, so that we can analyze that and develop better training guides. Seth had reasonable concerns given that between 2014 and 2016, states purged more than 16 million voters, most of which affected low-income and minority voters. In just New York City alone, during the Democratic primaries in 2016, according to then New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, 200,000 voters had been illegally wiped off the rolls and prevented from voting in the presidential primary. Many Bernie Sanders supporters suspected that the DNC was engaged in election fraud to nominate Hillary Clinton. It isn't clear whether Seth Rich was a supporter of Sanders, but he did openly consider himself a progressive. On Sunday, July 10th, 2016, at 4:20 a.m., Seth was shot to death about a block from where he lived in the Bloomingdale neighborhood of Washington, D.C. To this day, nobody was charged with the crime, and no law enforcement agency is investigating the murder. Although Seth's murder is unsolved, police suspect that it was an attempted robbery. Strangely, Seth still had his watch, keys, cell phone, wallet, or other valuables, so it's not clear why the report concluded that it was a, quote, botched robbery. Seth's mother, Mary, informed local TV news that her son fought with the killer, where she states that, quote, his hands were bruised, his knees are bruised, his face is bruised, and yet he had 2 shots to his back, and yet they never took anything. They took his life for literally no reason. They didn't finish robbing him. They just took his life, unquote. A month before Rich was murdered, on June 12, 2016, in a TV interview, Julian Assange stated that WikiLeaks had, quote, upcoming leaks in relation to Hillary Clinton, which are great, unquote. This statement clearly suggests that WikiLeaks was already in possession of damaging material on Hillary Clinton and the DNC. In fact, WikiLeaks already previously released a leaked DNC strategy memo on April 7th, which ultimately the strategy backfired since it was based on the assumption that it would be in the best interest of Clinton if Trump was the Republican presidential nominee. The fear was that, according to various polling data, Clinton would not have a fighting chance against more established Republican candidates such as Marco Rubio, John Kasich, and Ted Cruz. In any case, interestingly, a couple of days later, after WikiLeaks publicly announced upcoming leaks, on June 14th, the DNC released a statement claiming that their servers were compromised and that, according to the DNC's private contractor Crowdstrike, a cybersecurity firm, Russian hackers broke into their computer network, gaining access to all of their emails and other documents, in particular, Trump opposition research. On July 22nd, 12 days after Seth Rich was murdered, WikiLeaks published thousands of leaked DNC emails exposing that, quote, top-level Democratic Party officials, including DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz, conspired to rig the primaries against Senator Bernie Sanders, who was running to become the Democratic presidential nominee, unquote. Naturally, the pressing question is whether Russian government officials or hackers provided the damaging material in the form of emails to WikiLeaks. Intelligence agencies affirm that this is the case. For instance, here's a clip of former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper speaking on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C.
Russian military intelligence, or the GRU, compromised the email accounts of Democratic Party officials and publicly released victim data using the Gunther 2.0 persona and DCLeaks.com and in exclusives to media outlets. They also relayed material to WikiLeaks.
Despite Clapper's assessment, to this day, no U.S. law enforcement or intelligence agency conducted a thorough forensic examination of the DNC servers. Instead, Michael Sussman of the DNC's law firm Perkins Coie hired Crowdstrike, the private cyber security company, to examine and secure the DNC's computer network and hardware. The FBI would in turn simply accept the so-called evidence provided by the IT security consultants of Crowdstrike. In fact, it was recently reported in early June of this year, 2019, by Ray McGovern of Consortium News that, quote, the Justice Department admitted that Crowdstrike never produced an unredacted or final forensic report for the government because the FBI never required it to, unquote. Instead, the FBI received and based their conclusion on 3 redacted draft reports from Crowdstrike. Moreover, according to the January 2017 Intelligence Community Assessment, the FBI and CIA concluded with, quote, high confidence that the DNC server was hacked by Russian government officials, in which the stolen DNC emails were given to WikiLeaks.
Intelligence officials have, quote, high confidence in these sources, but stipulate that high confidence doesn't actually constitute fact or certainty. And not all agencies even subscribe to that. The NSA, for instance, says that they only have moderate confidence here.
Curiously, the NSA was only moderately confident, which is, according to former technical director of the NSA, William Binney, quote, intelligence speak for, we have no hard evidence, unquote.
You know, if you have high confidence, that means you don't really know for sure. They should have included at least some evidence of what they're asserting, and they haven't done any of that. They're making these kinds of decisions now without fundamentally finding out what really is true and what the facts basically are, and they're not really focusing on the facts or truth. They're basically looking at speculation, fabrication, and hyperbole.
Binney additionally argues that if the Russians actually had conducted an internet-based hack of the DNC computer network, then the evidence of such an attack would have been collected and stored by the National Security Agency. The technical systems to accomplish this task have been in place since 2002. The NSA had an opportunity to make it clear that there was irrefutable proof of Russian meddling, particularly with regard to the DNC hack, when it signed onto the January 2017 Intelligence Community Assessment. If those emails had been hijacked over the internet, the NSA would have been able to track the electronic path they traveled over the internet. This kind of data would allow the NSA to declare without reservation or caveat that the Russians were guilty. Instead, the NSA only claimed to have moderate confidence in the judgment regarding Russian meddling. If the NSA had hard intelligence to support the judgment, the conclusion would have been stated as full confidence, unquote. In fact, former NSA Director Admiral Mike Rogers, who played an important role in putting an end to the unauthorized abuse of Section 702 about queries, never identified Russia as responsible for the alleged hack of the DNC server. Instead, he maintained that, quote, a nation-state deliberately tried to interfere in the U.S. elections, which he also said did not ultimately sway or influence the election. The late investigative journalist Robert Perry, who founded Consortium News and is well known for his role in covering the Iran-Contra affair in the mid to late 1980s for the Associated Press and Newsweek, summed up the intelligence community assessment as follows, quote, the report contained no direct evidence that Russia delivered hacked emails from the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman John Podesta to WikiLeaks. The DNI report as presented is one-sided and lacks any actual proof. Further, the continued use of the word assesses suggests that the underlying classified information also may be less than conclusive because in intelligence world speak, assesses often means guesses, unquote. In fact, an assessment is not tantamount to evidence, but merely a belief or judgment without justification, hence the intelligence community assessment. Nevertheless, despite the questionable varying degrees of confidence of top intelligence officials in regards to Russian hacking, WikiLeaks repeatedly denied any Russian ties to the publication of the thousands of DNC files. Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, himself claimed that Russia was not the source of the WikiLeaks exposed DNC emails, but instead implied that it was Seth Rich, the DNC staffer. Assange inadvertently suggests this in an August 2016 interview on Dutch TV, 1 month after the murder of Seth Rich.
WikiLeaks never sits on material. Whistleblowers go to significant efforts to get us material and often very significant risks. There's a 27-year-old works for the DNC who was shot in the back, murdered just 2 weeks ago for unknown reasons as he was walking down the street in Washington. So
that was just a robbery, I believe, wasn't it?
No, there's no finding. So
what are you suggesting? What are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that our sources take risks, and they become concerned to see things occurring like that.
But was he one of your sources then? I mean,
we don't comment on who our sources are.
But why make the suggestion about a young guy being shot in the streets of Washington?
Because we have to understand how high the stakes are in the United States, and that our sources are, our sources face serious risks. That's why they come to us, so we can protect their anonymity.
But it's quite something to suggest a murder. That's basically what you're doing.
Well, others have suggested that. We are investigating to understand what happened in that situation with Seth Rich. I think it is a concerning situation. There's not a conclusion yet. We wouldn't be willing to state a conclusion, but we are concerned about it. And more importantly, a variety of WikiLeaks sources are concerned when that kind of thing happens.
The mainstream media has always been dismissive of any connection between the leaked documents and Seth Rich's murder, especially after the release of the Mueller Report, arguing that this is nothing more than a senseless and unsubstantiated conspiracy theory promulgated by the right wing or, quote, the product of alt-right paranoia, unquote. According to the New York Times, quote, the special counsel's report confirmed this week that Seth Rich was not the source, unquote. And Florida-based PolitiFact stated that, quote, the Mueller report might not end the debate over what President Donald Trump did, but it has scuttled one conspiracy theory involving a murdered Democratic Party staffer and WikiLeaks, unquote.
You're listening to ASP Stuff Radio.
Before we determine whether the Mueller report has scuttled the Seth Rich conspiracy theory, we need to critically address whether it is more plausible than the Russia account of the leaked DNC emails. In other words, which proposed narrative is more convincing? There are only two options available. One, either an employee of the DNC who worked as a voter expansion data director and passionate about electoral integrity discovered and provided WikiLeaks damaging information that exposed the fraudulent acts of the DNC and Clinton campaign, or two, a group of Russian hackers compromised the DNC computers in an effort to influence the election in Trump's favor. Now, the credibility of the Russian narrative crucially hinges on the assumption that a Trump presidency would have been beneficial to the interests of the Russian government, which many critics have argued makes no sense. Moreover, given the corrupt and baseless nature of the Mueller investigation into collusion between Russian operatives and Trump associates, and the fact that Mueller failed to, quote, commission any forensic examination of the DNC servers to substantiate the Russian hacking narrative, there's more reason to believe that the former scenario is more plausible. Let's consider some facts that may lend credence to the Seth Rich narrative. First and foremost, Julian Assange implied that Seth Rich was the source of the leak during an interview on the Dutch television program NewsHour in August 2016.
Whistleblowers go to significant efforts to get us material, and often very significant risks. As a 27-year-old works for the DNC, who was shot in the back, murdered just 2 weeks ago for unknown reasons as he was walking down the street in Washington.
Second, WikiLeaks posted a tweet offering a $20,000 reward for information on leading to a conviction for the murder of Seth Rich. Why would WikiLeaks put out a reward if there was not an assumed connection? Third, according to a controversial Fox News article written by Malia Zimmerman, published on May 16, 2017, Seth Rich shared Democratic emails with WikiLeaks shortly before he was murdered. An unnamed federal investigator told Fox News that after reviewing an FBI forensic report on the contents of Seth Rich's computer, 96 hours after his murder, Rich made contact with WikiLeaks through Gavin McFadyen. The investigator said, quote, "I have seen and read the emails between Seth Rich and WikiLeaks," unquote, confirming Rich's contact with McFadyen. Furthermore, the investigator claimed that Rich had transferred 44,053 emails and 17,761 attachments from DNC leaders to WikiLeaks through McFadyen between January 2015 and May 2016. The problem, though, is that because Zimmerman's source was anonymous, many have argued that her claims are only credible provided that Gavin McFadyen was willing and able to corroborate those claims. Unfortunately, McFadyen had died of lung cancer later that year on October 22, 2016, before Zimmerman's claims could be confirmed. McFadyen was an American-born investigative journalist who helped create the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in 2009. He was also the founder of Whistleblowers UK and served as a director of Julian Assange's WikiLeaks. McFadyen was a close friend and mentor of Assange. The only remaining evidence that would critically confirm Zimmerman's claims in her report is Seth Rich's laptop, since it would confirm whether Rich did in fact establish contact with WikiLeaks. Unfortunately, no intelligence agencies or U.S. security services have expressed any interest in or committed the task of securing and examining Seth Rich's computer. Third, Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan and close associate of Assange, who was involved in investigating the email leaking operation, claimed that he knew who leaked the emails. Murray further claimed that the DNC leak came from two different sources and that he, quote, met the person who leaked them, and they are certainly not Russian, and it's an insider. It's a leak, not a hack. The two are different things, unquote.
Who do you think leaked some of this information to WikiLeaks? Because I know you've gone on record to say that you had somebody in mind, or you thought you knew where it may have come from.
Yes, I know who the source is, and it is not a Russian source. It's an insider source. But it should be said, of course...
Insider, tell us more. I'm so sorry to it's such a serious subject. I just want to get a bit more on it. An insider to where, what?
I'm sorry if you... Forgive me if I don't go into much more detail, because obviously source protection
on the Russian side or the American side?
But it's definitely on the American side. So, no, that's plain. I mean, this is from a Washington insider. It's not from Russia.
Murray has stated in a shocking interview with Alana Goodman of the Daily Mail that he was in Washington in September 2016 to retrieve emails from an insider of the Democratic Party who was outraged at the corruption of the Clinton Foundation and the rigging of the primary election that negatively impacted Bernie Sanders. The insider had also claimed that there was no hack from abroad and the leaks did not come from Russia. According to Goodman, quote, Murray insisted that the DNC and Podesta emails published by WikiLeaks did not come from the Russians and were given to the whistleblowing group by Americans who had authorized access to the information. Neither of the leaks came from the Russians, Murray said. The source had legal access to the information. The documents came from inside leaks, not hacks. He said the leakers were motivated by disgust at the corruption of the Clinton Foundation and the tilting of the primary election playing field against Bernie Sanders. Murray said he retrieved the package from a source during a clandestine meeting in a wooded area near American University in Northwest D.C. He said the individual he met with was not the original person who obtained the information, but an intermediary, unquote. Was Seth Rich the original person who obtained the information? Could he have felt obligated to leak the information out of moral and political disgust at the discovery of the, quote, corruption of the Clinton Foundation and the tilting of the primary election playing field against Bernie Sanders? Although this question will perhaps forever remain unanswered, Craig Murray's testimony, if true, would forever scuttle the Russian hacking conspiracy theory. Fourth, and speaking of scuttling conspiracy theories, in an interview with Tucker Carlson on Fox News, William Binney, the previously mentioned former NSA officer, explains why he disagrees with the allegation that Russians hacked into the DNC servers. Binney is also a member of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, also known as VIPS, a respectable, nonpartisan group that consists of former officers of the U.S. intelligence community whose mission is to provide an objectively focused and critical analysis of facts pertaining to various important contemporary social political issues.
First of all, when this first came out last year, about a year ago, I started opposing that simply because of the way the intelligence community was talking and knowing that the NSA, for example, has all the fiber optic taps across the United States and even around the world, plus trace route programs embedded in hundreds of places all over the network. So I knew they would know if packets were being passed around the U.S. or outside the U.S. or anywhere in the world, they could trace them and see who got them. I mean, they did that several years ago with the Chinese hack that came in that said it came from that building, I think, in Shanghai. Well, they could do the same thing with virtually any hack. So right away, I began to question that assertion that they were hacking into the DNC. Then we had a fellow who basically had access. It seems to me he had to have access to the network log of the DNC server, which means that any transactions going into and out of the DNC network log get registered or logged inside that log, and it goes into a list of what packets come in from what IPs and so on, and going back and forth. So that to me said that from there he listed out the data, the raw data from the transactions in the log, which meant the time the transmission started, the time it ended, the amounts of data passed, and any other identifying IPs are buried in those packets that were passed too, if the NSA would ever give them to you. But I think this is probably one of the reasons the DNC didn't let the FBI look at it, because it would show that at the rate. See, it was taken out at the rate of 1,976 megabytes, or it was taking out at,
and you make the point that it was moved too fast. Right, so it couldn't have gone out over the internet. It had to have been taken directly in person from the computer, downloaded onto some sort of mobile storage device. So given that the NSA clearly doesn't have the evidence it would have if it happened, and that it couldn't have been hacked over the internet, then why is everyone in government still pretending that's what happened? That's the confusing part to me.
Well, I guess it appears that many people are emotionally tied to this agenda to tie the Russians with President Trump and the Trump administration. One way or the other, they want to do it. So it's hard for them to give up that argument. I mean, it's like they're emotionally stuck with it. We in VIPS try to look at things just straightforward. What are the facts? Find the exact facts in the case, and then make a decision from that, not from other agendas driving us or anything that's motivating us to do or say things that we can't substantiate with facts.
In summary, Binney and members of VIPS argue that their cybersecurity forensic analysis has demonstrated that, quote, the DNC data was copied onto a storage device at a speed that far exceeds an internet capability for a remote hack. Of equal importance, forensics show that the copying was performed on the East Coast of the United States, unquote. As a matter of fact, the DNC files were copied at an average of 22.7 megabytes per second, which is a typical speed for file transfer to a memory stick, and virtually impossible to achieve from distant parts of the world through the internet, much less over a local network. At most, there was a peak rate of 38 megabytes per second that was reached during the transfer. Binney and his colleagues conducted forensic tests from the United States to the Netherlands, Albania, Belgrade, and the United Kingdom. The fastest internet rate obtained from a data center in New Jersey to a data center in the United Kingdom was 12 megabytes per second. Therefore, it would have been physically impossible for a remote hack to occur in which data was transferred from a foreign agency. This conclusion suggests that there was never an outside hack, but rather an internal leak. Someone inside the DNC downloaded files from the DNC server, copied and stored the data onto a file storage device such as a thumb drive, and leaked that information to WikiLeaks. Fifth, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly and other top people in the administration suspiciously prevented California Representative Dana Rohrabacher from briefing Trump about an August 2017 meeting he had in London with Julian Assange. According to Rohrabacher, Assange had shown him proof that Russia, quote, was not the source of the Democratic Party communications that WikiLeaks published during the 2016 campaign, unquote, and that Assange did not want to release the evidence to the public for fear of exposing his sources and methods.
The key to determining whether or not the Russians actually hijacked the election by working with Donald Trump, by hacking into the Democratic National Committee, the secret of disproving that is to say who did. And Julian Assange has, when I met with him, repeatedly told me that the Russians were not involved at all.
The senator now says that he can't meet with Donald Trump. In fact, according to Rohrabacher, he's being blocked from meeting with the president. RT's Samira Khan has more.
It's an undercutting of democracy when the guy who's elected, his staffers take it upon themselves to make the decision rather than let the actual president make the decision.
When asked about a possible deal with Assange, President Donald Trump told reporters he hadn't heard anything about it. Now, Julian Assange is the founder of WikiLeaks, the website that's been responsible for releasing tons of information, much of it very embarrassing for the U.S. government. Assange has been hiding from extradition in the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK for the last 5 years now. A White House official confirmed that Rohrabacher talked to White House Chief of Staff John Kelly about his plan. However, Kelly reportedly turned him down and said that the plan should be left up to the intelligence community. Congressman Rohrabacher believes the president's aides are preventing President Trump from learning about the possibility of a deal with Assange.
This would have to be a cooperative effort between his own staff and the leadership in the intelligence communities to try to prevent the president from making the decision as to whether or not he wants to take the steps necessary to expose this horrendous lie that was shoved down the American people's throats so incredibly earlier this year.
By horrendous lie, the congressman is most likely referring to Russian collusion, speculation that Russia was responsible for the DNC hack. Assange has always insisted it was non-state actors who leaked the DNC files to WikiLeaks. Now, according to Congressman Rohrabacher, Assange is ready to tell the truth, but it looks like Washington doesn't want to hear it.
Once again, if Russia is not the source of the WikiLeaks publication, then there were no Russian hackers. When asked why John Kelly blocked Rohrabacher from meeting with Trump, Kelly responded that it could, quote, put the president in unnecessary legal jeopardy, unquote.
You're listening to ASP Stuff Radio.
6. Joe Lauria, a veteran foreign affairs journalist who's written for the Boston Globe and the Wall Street Journal, wrote an August 2017 article for Consortium News about a leaked audio recording of a conversation between Ed Butowski, a Republican donor and Trump supporter, and legendary Seymour Hersh, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist. Hersh is celebrated for exposing the My Lai massacre and its cover-up during the Vietnam War, his reporting on Watergate for the New York Times, and his 1974 article on how the CIA, quote, conducted a massive illegal domestic intelligence operation during the Nixon administration against the anti-war movement and other dissident groups in the United States. Both Hersh and Butowski were investigating Seth Rich's death, which explains their meeting. The conversation between the two was leaked to the public. Butowski later admitted that he recorded the interview without Hersh's permission. Moral integrity aside, a crucial piece of information that stands out is that Hersh alludes to an alleged FBI report that establishes that Seth Rich downloaded files from the DNC and sent the damaging emails to WikiLeaks.
about the kid, and I'll tell you what I know. What I know comes off an FBI report. The kid gets, I don't think he was murdered. I don't think he was murdered because of what he knew. The kid's a nice boy, 27. He was not an IT expert, but he learned stuff. He was a data programmer, but he learned stuff. And so he's living on one street. He's living in a very rough neighborhood. And in the exact area where he'd been, there have been about 10, I'm sure you know all this, there have been about 8 or 9 or 10 violent robberies, most of them with somebody brandishing a gun. And it's the kid's hands, I'm telling you, I'm sure you know it, his hands were marked up. The cops concluded he fought off the people, tried to run, and they shot him twice in the back with a .22, small caliber. And then the kids that did it ran. They got scared, didn't take his role. Okay, so what the cops do then, so they get a warrant. They go in the house and they can't do much with his computer, his password. The cops don't know much about it. So the DC cops, they have a cyber unit in DC, and they're more sophisticated. They come and look at it. The idea is maybe he's had a series of exchanges with somebody who says, I'm going to kill you, motherfucker, over a girl. And they can't get in. The cyber guys do a little better, but they can't make sense of it. So they call the FBI cyber unit, the DC unit. They call in the feds. The feds get through, and here's what they find. This is according to the FBI report. So what the report says is sometime in late spring, he makes contact with WikiLeaks. That's in his computer, and he makes contact. Now, they found what he had done. He had submitted a series of documents, of emails, some juicy emails from the DNC. And, by the way, all this shit about the DNC, whether hacked or wasn't hacked, but whatever happened, the Democrats themselves wrote this shit. You know what I mean? All I know is that he offered a sample, an extensive sample, I'm sure dozens of emails, and said, I want money. That later, WikiLeaks did get the password. He had a Dropbox, a protected Dropbox, which isn't hard to do. I mean, you don't have to be a wizard, IT wizard. He was certainly, he's not a dumb kid. And they got access to the Dropbox. He also, this is also in the FDA report, he also let people know with whom he was dealing. And I don't know how he dealt, I'll tell you about WikiLeaks in a second. I don't know how he dealt with the WikiLeaks, the mechanism, but he also, the word was passed according to the FBI report. I also shared this box with a couple of friends. So if anything happens to me, it's not going to solve your problem. Okay? I don't know what that means. I don't know whether he was, anyway. But WikiLeaks got access, and before he was killed.
I will read Joe Loria's transcription of the important parts of the recording where Hirsch says the following. Seth Rich had submitted a series of documents, of emails, some juicy emails, from the DNC. And by the way, it was not hacked. Whatever happened, the Democrats wrote this shit. He offered a sample, an extensive sample. I'm sure dozens of emails, and said, I want money. Then later WikiLeaks did get the password. He had a Dropbox, a protected Dropbox, which isn't hard to do. You don't have to be an IT wizard. He was not a dumb kid. They got access to the Dropbox, and this is also in the FBI report. He also let people know with whom he was dealing. I don't know how he dealt with the WikiLeaks and the mechanism, but he also, the word was passed according to the NSA report, quote, I also share this box with a couple of friends, so if anything happens to me, it's not going to solve your problems, unquote. Okay, I don't know what that means. I don't know whether he... Anyway, WikiLeaks got access before he was killed. Joe Loria contacted Hirsch and confirmed that the voice on the leaked audio was in fact his. Hirsch's investigative findings are based on an FBI insider who has read a computer forensic audit of Seth Rich's computer. Thus, the following conclusions can be drawn. 1. There exists an FBI forensic report. 2. The FBI gained access to Seth Rich's computer. 3. Seth Rich had DNC files on his computer. 4. Seth Rich contacted WikiLeaks. 5. Seth Rich asked for money. 6. Seth Rich submitted an extensive sample of DNC emails to WikiLeaks. 7. Seth Rich had a protected Dropbox. 8. WikiLeaks had access to the password and retrieved Seth Rich's Dropbox account. Another noteworthy disclosure from the leaked conversation is Hirsch's belief that the DNC fabricated the Russian hacking story as a disinformation campaign and then named former CIA Director John Brennan as the architect.
I have what they call it in my business long-form journalism. I have a narrative of how that whole fucking thing began. It's a Brennan operation. It was an American disinformation, and the fucking president, at one point, they even started telling the press, they were back briefing the press, that we even know who in the GRU, the Russian Military Intelligence Service, leaked it.
In case the audio was difficult to decipher, Hersh stated that the Trump-Russia conspiracy was, quote, a Brennan operation. It was American disinformation. The fucking president, at one point, they even started telling the press, they were back briefing the press, that we even know who in the GIU, the Russian Military Intelligence Service, who leaked it. It was all bullshit, unquote. In other words, Hersh is claiming that high-ranking officials in United States intelligence, namely John Brennan, deliberately lied to the press about the Russian hacking allegations. Finally, Robert Mueller's report fails to systematically rule out the Seth Rich narrative. In fact, Seth's name is only mentioned 4 times in the 400-page report. As the report states, quote, beginning in the summer of 2016, Assange and WikiLeaks made a number of statements about Seth Rich, a former DNC staff member who was killed in July 2016. The statements about Rich implied falsely that he had been the source of the stolen DNC emails. On August 9, 2016, the WikiLeaks Twitter account posted, quote, announce, WikiLeaks has decided to issue a $20,000 reward for information leading to conviction for the murder of DNC staffer Seth Rich, unquote. That's it. Mueller perfunctorily dismisses any connection between Rich and the DNC email leak, as if the DNC staffer's role was utterly insubstantial or irrelevant to the Russiagate scandal. Mueller does not elaborate what exactly these number of statements about Seth Rich are, and most importantly, in what respect these statements falsely imply that Seth is the source of the stolen DNC emails. In other words, he does not provide arguments or evidence to disprove any of the claims that Seth Rich was the source of the leaked emails. Furthermore, nothing in Mueller's report indicates that he conducted a thorough forensic analysis. For instance, did Mueller examine Seth's personal emails and computer or his bank account to see if there was a transfer of money from a WikiLeaks representative? Most importantly, why didn't Mueller contact members of VIPS, including Binney and McGovern, who cited, quote, new forensic studies that challenged the claim of the key January 6th assessment that Russia hacked Democratic emails, unquote. Recall that according to VIPS, the DNC data was leaked, not hacked, by a person with physical access to the DNC's computer system, since the download rate of the data could not have been possible from a remote online connection. In addition, it's almost laughable that Mueller didn't even bother to interview Julian Assange, the most crucial person who would know who provided him the internal DNC documents. In fact, Craig Murray of WikiLeaks, which Mueller also failed to contact, said that Assange would, quote, very willing give evidence to Mueller, which could have been done by video link, by interview in the embassy, or by written communication, unquote. Just like the American investigative reporter Richard Engel, who debunked the Steele dossier in January 2017, was able and willing to interview Julian Assange by video link.
3 cybersecurity experts told us that the DNC emails were hacked by Russian intelligence. What do you say?
Well, there's no proof of that whatsoever. We have not disclosed our source. And of course, this is a diversion that's being pushed by the Hillary Clinton campaign.
Mueller also did not question Seth Rich's family members and friends, especially those who may have been given his Dropbox password. Finally, Mueller clearly did not pursue another important lead, namely world-renowned investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, who suggested in the interview that there exists an alleged FBI report on Seth Rich. In light of this evidence and Mueller's abysmal failure to systematically rule out Seth Rich as the primary source of the WikiLeaks publication of the damaging DNC files, then if both the Russian hack and Trump-Russia collusion narrative is nothing more than a maliciously disingenuous disinformation campaign, or as Hirsch put it, bullshit, it follows that the Seth Rich narrative is the genuine alternative. However, whether Seth was murdered because he leaked the DNC files remains a mystery. After all, his death could have been a politically unrelated yet unfortunate tragedy. Part 13. His name is Sean Lucas. But it wasn't the only unfortunate tragedy that occurred during the upcoming months of the 2016 U.S. presidential election, an incident that barely received any corporate mainstream media coverage. It was the death of 38-year-old Sean Lucas, a, quote, happy, exuberant process server, unquote. On Friday, July 1st, 2016, ahead of the 4th of July weekend, Lucas served a class action lawsuit at the DNC headquarters in Washington, D.C., on behalf of supporters of presidential candidate Bernie Sanders and donors and members of the Democratic Party. The lawsuit, filed by Jared Beck and Elizabeth Beck of law firm Beck and Lee, charged the DNC and then chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz with, quote, fraud, negligent misrepresentation, deceptive conduct, unjust enrichment, breach of fiduciary duty, and negligence, unquote. Essentially, for rigging or influencing the Democratic primary in favor of Hillary Clinton and, quote, failed to secure the data of DNC donors, which, according to Jared Beck, relates to the unsolved murder of Seth Rich, since he, quote, would have been a potential witness given that Seth was the voter expansion data director for the DNC. It's interesting to note that the lawsuit was filed before WikiLeaks released the DNC emails, which would further serve as proof of the allegations in the lawsuit, such as the claim that, quote, lawyers at Perkins Coie were engaged in strategies that appear to benefit Clinton over Sanders, unquote, which raises questions about potential conflict of interests involving the case. As of this month, June 2019, there's a video recording with over 600,000 views on YouTube of Sean Lucas serving the DNC with the lawsuit. Lucas says on camera that he was, quote, excited and thrilled to be the process server and that it felt like his birthday and Christmas all at once, probably the most satisfying thing I've ever done. The filmmaker documenting and commenting on the event is Ricardo Villalba.
So here we are in front of the Democratic National Headquarters. We're about to go in there and we're going to serve them with some legal papers. My name is Ricardo. I'm a video producer as well, and I'm very excited to do this. We have Lucas that's getting ready, so we're going to follow him. We don't know if the security is going to let us film inside, but we're going to try. And here we go. You ready, Lucas? Okay, let's go. Let's do this.
Let's do this. We have some papers to drop off for DNC. Either Debbie Wasserman, Ravik, Maria Durazo, Donnie Brazel.
So how many? Is it 2 files? That you...
2 files.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. One for Debbie and one for the DNC as a whole.
Oh, okay. Well, as you know, it's a holiday weekend, so we're assuming a lot of people are out of town, so we probably won't be able to serve Debbie in person. But we're still here. We're here, and you guys are going to witness this live right now. I think a lot of people are happy about this. Somebody says they're happy about this too.
I'm very happy.
Look at him.
Thrilled.
Yeah. I think we're very excited because I feel like this is kind of, we're going to push the Democratic Party to do the right thing, exactly, to do the right thing and to really advocate for people like us, the people that are really struggling, you know. And
the constituents.
The constituent and all that, and not just serve the wealthy people. I think this is part of the revolution that sometimes we cannot expect just one leader to make a difference. We have to all work together. Somebody says that they're thankful that we're doing this. So I said that, we're doing it for everybody. Everybody needs to get involved if we want to see changes happening in our country. And I know we all had hope for Bernie, but at this point, it's also up to us. We need to elect leaders that are going to really represent us. We need to push for, advocate for justice, for equality. Yeah, that's what we want to do. We want to actually tell people you've been served. Yeah,
it's
me
like
too.
Birthday and Christmas and Canada Day all coming together at the same time. Happy Canada Day, guys.
Okay, here it is.
Okay. Hey.
Hey.
How are you?
Good.
I'm Sean.
Sean, hi, Becca.
Becca.
How you doing, Becca?
I'm just with the DNC upstairs.
With the DNC?
Yes.
All right. Well, this is going to be a service to the DNC.
DNC? Okay.
And this is for Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Perfect.
You guys have been served.
Okay.
Thank you so much. We'll see you in court. Guys, thank you so much for everything. Have a great day. A
Thank you.
Weekend and happy 4th of July.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
That was probably the most gratifying thing I've ever done.
You ever done? So let me see. So here it is, people. You guys were able to witness that. Here it is, the Democratic headquarters. We were able to deliver the documents.
Yeah, they wouldn't give us any of the head honchos, which I kind of had a feeling wasn't going to happen. But we did make contact with somebody from the Democratic National Committee's office, and they've been served. Democracy has prevailed today.
Exactly, and you guys all were witness to it. That's the beauty of technology. I'm so happy today. Now,
we're both happy.
Have a wonderful 4th of July weekend.
Happy 4th of July weekend, everybody. One source process.
This is something that you can drink on this weekend. Cheers. Yeah. Cheers.
You're listening to ASP Stuff Radio.
The attorneys of the law firm Perkins Coie, representing the DNC and Debbie Schultz, filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit on the basis that Lucas did not properly serve it for the reason that the DNC staff member at DNC headquarters was not authorized to receive the lawsuit on behalf of the DNC and Wasserman. This is an outlandish claim because the DNC staffer was Rebecca Harries, who at the time was the special assistant to then CEO of the DNC, Amy Dacey. To counter the motion and file a written opposition with the court, Jared Beck, who was representing the Bernie Sanders supporters, tried to contact Lucas to get an affidavit from him since he would have been paramount in testifying as a witness in court at the August 23rd evidentiary hearing on whether the case should be heard. Unfortunately, Beck was unable to contact Lucas because on August 2nd, 2016, Lucas's girlfriend found him unconscious on the floor of the bathroom at her home in Washington, D.C. Lucas died from what was reported by Office of Chief Medical Examiner of D.C., an accident due to the, quote, combined adverse effects of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid pain medication more powerful than heroin, cyclobenzaprine, a muscle relaxant, and mitragynine, a primary constituent of an herbal plant better known as kratom, which is intended to enhance mood, reduce pain, and treat withdrawal symptoms from opioids. Friends of Lucas, however, indicated that he was never into drugs. One friend in particular has said that, quote, I literally have heard from Sean's mouth in person that he did not like painkillers. Opioids was not in his interests. Sean was not one of those people. He was in fact just the opposite. He was a very active, spring to the morning type person, unquote. According to Lucas's parents, he was, quote, in good health and led a very disciplined life. Indeed, his brother maintained that Lucas was a disciplined martial artist who would occasionally travel to Brazil to study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Even Jared Beck stated that Lucas did not seem like the type of person to abuse drugs, and that despite the DC coroner ruling Lucas's death as an accident, quote, to my knowledge, no real investigation has been done into what exactly happened, unquote. Finally, the process firm that Lucas worked for, One Source Process, claims on their website that, quote, Before hired, our process servers receive an extensive background check followed by a training program designed to put each of our employees in the best position to exceed client standards, unquote. None of these facts would suggest that Lucas was a regular drug abuser. According to drug interaction information websites, it is extremely rare and dangerous to find fentanyl and cyclobenzaprine used together as a, quote, common recreational cocktail, since the two together may induce coma or even death. To provide some insight on this issue, let's listen to a clip from Tim Black's popular alternative independent YouTube news channel called TBTV, where he has medical expert Dr. Bruce provide a brief toxicology analysis of Sean Lucas.
On the topic of Sean Lucas, 3 drugs were found in his system. One of them is fentanyl. Fentanyl happens to be one of the primary drugs that can kill you. It's an opioid, which means it's related to opium and morphine. And just like you hear morphine can kill you, so can fentanyl. And interestingly, it's also, of those 3, it is the one that's injectable and transdermal, which means that you can put it on somebody's skin and it can get absorbed that way, or you can inject it and it can get absorbed that way. So that's actually a very good sort of a red flag drug. If I saw that one in somebody's system and they happen to pass away, I'm going to be thinking about asking questions. There's different levels of it that typically lead to intoxication versus therapeutic, and it takes quite a bit more for it to lead to overdose, which means usually, the reason I bring that up, I'll say the numbers. It's 0.3 to 3 micrograms per liter for therapeutic, and then 1 to 10 micrograms per liter for intoxicated. But you usually have to get into the hundreds for it to kill you. Up to 300 will kill you. And Sean was a big enough guy that he could tolerate taking more of it. He wasn't like the size of a small woman. So he could handle taking more of it. More of it was required for him to become more than intoxicated. Okay, that's the other drug he was on is Flexeril or cyclobenzaprine, and that's a muscle relaxer, which is available as an oral medication, but also in suspension, meaning you can pour it into someone's throat. The last one is a very bizarre one. The last one is an opioid similar to the fentanyl, which means you wouldn't normally take it necessarily together. And now if you say, okay, well, what if you're having fun with it? What if you're taking it recreationally to get high? Well, now if you're doing that, you wouldn't typically double up on it. Even people who are drinking a little lean, they're not mixing up multiple stuff in it. They're putting their single dose of whatever their opioid of choice and mixing it in, and that's it. So why were there 2 of them in his case? And one of them, the second one, and I have a hard time pronouncing it, except for it's also called kratom, and I'm going to give it a try here. Mitraglynin, that one apparently is used recreationally a lot in Southeast Asia. Hasn't really caught on in the States. So if I were to look at these 3 drugs and find them in his system, I wouldn't instantly say that they were there for recreational reasons. But if they're there for therapeutic reasons, like he has a history of back pain or whatever, he has chronic pain of some sort, there's a doctor who had to give it to him. If there's a doctor that prescribed it, at least in Arizona and California, the medical boards there would be involved trying to at least track the fact that he perished over those drugs, if not do more to try to investigate and find out why was there an overdose. Usually with the thought of maybe this doctor needs to lose his medical license. So there should be, under normal circumstances, there should be a lot of paper trails all over the place in this particular case. And there may be that we don't know about, but from different perspectives, there should be a lot of paper trails because this is a little bit unusual, to say the least. The combination and the fact that most people, if they're on prescription medications, they don't usually die over it, but when they do, the medical board's involved looking at the doctors who prescribed them.
If, according to Dr. Bruce, these 2 drugs are rarely combined together for recreational use due to the high risk of death, then unless suicide was a motive, which seems unlikely according to Sean's friends and family, And given his excitement to see the DNC brought to justice, what could be the alternative explanation of Lucas's lethal dose of fentanyl and cyclobenzaprine? There's certainly no conclusive evidence of a homicide, but neither is there conclusive evidence of an accident or suicide. The final clip I want to play is from Jared Beck himself, the attorney for plaintiffs in the DNC fraud lawsuit, who briefly summarizes the facts surrounding the mysterious death of Sean Lucas, with Stefan Molyneux, a well-known Canadian podcaster and YouTuber, on his popular show Free Domain Radio.
Your firm hired a process server named Sean Lucas, and I've seen some fairly prominent journalists talking about Sean Lucas and Seth Rich in the same breath. I wonder if you could tell people, what is the story with Sean Lucas? Do you think it has any relationship to what might have happened to Seth Rich?
Well, I'll just tell you the facts as I know them about Sean Lucas, and people can draw their own conclusions. We hired, when we first filed the suit back in June of last year, we hired a process serving company in the DC area to effect service of process on the two defendants, Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the DNC. And the process server ended up being a young man by the name of Sean Lucas. And at the time, we thought it would be interesting for us to live stream the actual service of process at DNC headquarters, just to show people who were interested in the lawsuit that, the lawsuit was getting off the ground and being served. So we had a camera person follow Sean into the DNC headquarters and video him as he was making service of process. Now, what happened after that is that the DNC's lawyers made an appearance in the case, and their first motion to dismiss was based on the claim that Sean Lucas had not served process correctly. And so our first, we had it on videotape, and we were basically in the process of reaching out to Sean's process firm in DC to get an affidavit from him to counter the DNC's allegations in their motion, when we learned through social media that he had suddenly died. This was, I want to say, 10 days after the DNC had filed their motion, and we were in the process of preparing our response. And, that was a very shocking piece of news because, Sean Lucas, he was, seemed to be a very healthy young man in his 20s. He seemed, you can watch him on the video. He's very robust. Very unexpected. I believe this happened maybe a couple weeks after the Seth Rich murder. And so there was already in the air, a lot of speculation and wonderment about what had happened to this young DNC staffer on the streets of DC, supposedly murdered in a botched robbery, but they didn't take his wallet or his watch. And so eventually, we got an email from the DC police basically indicating that, and I should tell you that he had been found on his bathroom floor by his girlfriend at like 8 in the morning. That's what we eventually found out when we first learned that Sean had passed away. Later on, the DC police issued us an email concluding that the death had been accidental. And it listed 3 different drugs that were detected in his body. How they ended up ruling his death accidental, there's no indication, and we haven't had any information on that.
Whether the deaths of Seth Rich and Sean Lucas were politically motivated or simply unfortunate tragedies that occurred during a controversial presidential election is impossible to determine. However, one suspicious fact is noteworthy. Crowdstrike received a significant sum of money from the DNC the day after Seth Rich died and the day after Sean Lucas died. This campaign finance data is available on the Federal Election Commission website under disbursements filed by the DNC Services and DNC. Now, this financial transaction could be entirely coincidental, and of course, fodder for conspiracy theorists, but let's not lose sight of the common thread. Seth Rich and Sean Lucas were politically proactive individuals who believed in doing the right thing, and like thousands across the country, felt morally outraged by the corrupt actions of various DNC officials that were revealed by WikiLeaks. As Pam and Russ Martin wrote in their Wall Street on Parade article, there had been a major house cleaning of DNC officials implicated in the DNC emails leaked by WikiLeaks, showing that key executives had secretly strategized on how to sabotage the campaign of Senator Bernie Sanders, while bolstering the campaign for Hillary Clinton. DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz had stepped down earlier as a result of the emails at the outset of the Democratic Convention, unquote. Couple this with the fact that the DNC and Clinton campaign agreed that, quote, in exchange for raising money and investing in the DNC, Hillary Clinton would control the party's finances, strategy, and all the money raised. Her campaign had the right of refusal of who would be the party communications director, and it would make final decisions on all the other staff, unquote. How did WikiLeaks obtain knowledge of this deceitful conspiratorial plan to sabotage the 2016 Democratic primary battle against Bernie Sanders? Was it the result of a foreign Russian hack or a leak from someone inside the DNC? In an ideal world, we would have already known the answer to this important question only if the DNC allowed the FBI to procure and inspect their computer servers. Crowdstrike, hired by the DNC, claimed that it was Russian hackers, but Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, repeatedly claimed that it was not Russia. Moreover, contrarian forensic evidence would support Assange's claim. Thus, if the Russians drop out of the equation, then who was the leaker? The answer to this critical question lies with Assange.
You're listening to ASP Stuff Radio.
Part 14, Forever Silent. On March 11th, 2019, the Executive Board of the U.S.-controlled International Monetary Fund, or IMF, approved a $4.2 billion arrangement under the IMF's Extended Fund Facility for Ecuador. The arrangement is to provide support for the Ecuadorian government's economic policies over the next 3 years. On April 11, 2019, after Mueller's report was released, Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno revoked Julian Assange's 7-year asylum from the Ecuadorian embassy in London due to a series of alleged disputes with authorities. Assange was then immediately arrested by London police, and the U.S. Department of Justice charged him with conspiring to hack a Pentagon computer by helping former Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning crack a password. The charge was based on a 2017 indictment that was recently and mysteriously made public just before Assange's asylum was withdrawn. Is it just a coincidence that the infamous WikiLeaks founder was arrested after Ecuador received billions in funding from the IMF, and days after the Russia probe came to an official end, proving that there was no Trump-Russia collusion? The DOJ has requested that the UK extradite Assange to the United States and try him for conspiracy. But extradition cases between two countries is a complex legal affair that may take several years before he is handed over to the United States. In fact, a London judge recently ruled that Assange is set to appear before a British court early next year, 2020, in a hearing on whether he should be extradited to the United States. Until then, Assange will remain imprisoned at London's HM prison, Belmarsh. Since Julian Assange knows who leaked the DNC documents, and probably a lot more than we can possibly fathom, given his history of revealing many U.S. war crimes, his arrest was, according to the world-renowned American linguist, philosopher, social critic, and political activist Noam Chomsky, a, quote, soft coup in an effort to silence a journalist who was producing materials that people in power did not want the rascal multitude to know about, unquote. Unfortunately, Chomsky continues, quote, this is the kind of scandal that takes place over and over again, unquote. And that, he says, is deeply disturbing. Part 15, Trump for Russia and Election Interference. If the allegations are true that the Russians hacked the U.S. election for the sole purpose of swaying the election for Donald Trump, their Russian puppet, then would the Russians have allowed or willingly participated in the production of the Steele dossier with the colluding efforts of the DNC and Clinton campaign? It wouldn't make logical sense. After all, if the Russians were rooting for Trump, then why would they go through painstaking efforts to prevent him from winning the presidential election? There's evidence to believe that Russia wouldn't even want a Trump presidency, since Russian interests are more historically in alignment with a Clinton presidency. To cite one major example, and this has been confirmed by Mike McIntyre, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter of the New York Times, in 2015, Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation were involved in the transfer of 20% of all U.S. uranium, an essential ingredient for making nuclear weapons, to Russia's uranium mining company, Uranium One, a contentious act that raised serious security concerns. In exchange, 9 foreign investors connected with the deal paid, in total, $145 million to the Clinton Foundation. The well-documented Uranium One deal, which many have claimed the FBI knew about, contributed significantly to Russia's assistance in the development of the Iran nuclear program, or the Iran deal, one for which Trump adamantly opposed and in fact withdrew from in May 2018. The withdrawal from the Iran deal is the main reason why Iran recently threatened to increase its production of enriched uranium, which ultimately led to the current U.S.-Iran crisis.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet. You're the puppet. No, you're the
Russians.
Russia would not benefit from a Trump presidency, especially in light of Trump's administrative actions that have posed threats to the country, at least according to Noam Chomsky, one of the greatest intellectual giants of our lifetime. In this clip, Chomsky debunks the accusation that Trump acts in deference to or on behalf of Putin by arranging foreign policies that would be conducive to the interests of Russia.
Do you believe that Donald Trump colluded with the Russian government?
I haven't the slightest idea, and I don't care.
Isn't it important, though? I mean, the corporate media...
If there's going to be collusion, I think we can guess what it is. Maybe he made some deal to have a Trump hotel put up in Moscow. Okay. That's corrupt, but it's the kind of corruption that unfortunately is all over the place.
But with a quid pro quo of the Russians helping.
Of what? The quid pro quo is that he's increased military action on the Russian border. He's created a huge military expansion of the military budget aimed at Russia. He's pulled out of the INF Treaty, which is a major threat to Russia. What's the quid pro quo?
Chomsky's point is that a Trump presidency is counterproductive to the interests of Russia. For example, Trump fulfilled his promise and pulled out of a landmark Cold War-era nuclear weapons treaty, or the INF, that was established with the Soviet Union in 1987. This withdrawal will only open and escalate an arms race between the United States and Russia and pose a direct threat to the country. Furthermore, Trump has always campaigned on a program to achieve energy independence, one that would undermine Russia's, quote, control of the world's crude oil and natural gas, or to manage supply and dictate prices, unquote. Now, for the first time in 70 plus years, the U.S. is on its way of becoming one of the world's top oil exporters, according to the consultancy Petroleum Industry Research Associates Energy Group. Finally, as early as August 2017, Trump considered invading Venezuela, a close Kremlin ally. But Putin has, quote, warned Trump to keep the U.S. military away from Venezuela or run the risk of catastrophe, unquote. To further instigate economic and social tensions in Venezuela, in late January 2019, Trump extended and intensified Obama's 2015 deadly sanctions on Venezuela's state-owned oil company in an effort to overthrow the democratically elected president Nicolas Maduro from power. Venezuela oil fields are Russia's major source of oil, and so any radical political change in Venezuela would negatively impact Russia's financial investments and economy. Therefore, the claim that Russia interfered with the U.S. election in an attempt to benefit from a Trump presidency is not entirely convincing. Still, we know that the Russians meddled or interfered with our election, not by hacking the DNC servers and releasing thousands of damaging files, but through what is called information warfare, which is broadly defined as the use of information technology to gain a social or political advantage. In regards to the Russia-based Internet Research Agency, also known as IRA, or, quote, troll farm, the company implemented a, quote, social media campaign, which was mainly designed to provoke and amplify political and social discord in the United States, unquote. In other words, to provoke and widen the political divide among American citizens. Congress released more than 3,000 advertisements that consisted mostly of trivial adolescent memes on Facebook and Instagram between 2015 and 2017. According to the House Intelligence Committee, more than 11.4 million American users were exposed to the ads, which were intended to manipulate their political views. Moreover, the Mueller Report claims that, quote, the IRA campaign evolved from a generalized program designed in 2014 and 2015 to undermine the U.S. electoral system to a targeted operation that by early 2016 favored candidate Trump and disparaged candidate Clinton, unquote. Even if it's true that the focus of influence shifted towards favoring Trump, the efforts of the IRA probably had very little impact in ultimately swaying U.S. voters in the election. Critics, including Noam Chomsky, argue that the IRA attempts to influence the U.S. election is minuscule compared to numerous historical cases of foreign interference that has had a much more substantial impact on American elections. Chomsky cites one example of, quote, dramatic interference with elections by Israel, where in March 2015, the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, without informing the White House, talked to a joint session of Congress to attack Obama's Iran nuclear deal and to convince Congress to vote for imposing new sanctions on Iran.
What are your overall thoughts on how the media has reported on quote-unquote Russiagate, the accusation that Russia has interfered in the 2016 election and might have interfered in the 2020 election?
I think it's so farcical that I barely even read the reports. It's a joke. I mean, if there was any interference by the Russians, it's essentially undetectable. There are careful analyses of what happened in the elections. You can see how it changed, how the money poured in, all sorts of things. There's no sign of any Russian effect. Furthermore, it's just almost incredible from the beginning. I mean, what happened in the Senate and the House in 2016? Did the Russians interfere in the Senate elections? It went exactly the same way. Furthermore, the whole thing is a bad joke for all sorts of reasons. And for one thing, there are countries that do interfere in American elections, openly, publicly, forcefully. One of them even sent its prime minister to address a joint session of Congress to attack the initiative being taken by the sitting president. Is that interference? That was Benjamin Netanyahu, and that's only one part of it. I mean, that's large-scale, massive interference. Any other country did that, we'd have a huge scandal.
Interestingly, Netanyahu's speech helped him, quote, recover in the polls and, against all odds, win another term as Israel's prime minister, unquote. More importantly, Chomsky stresses that, quote, no interference in elections begins to compare with campaign funding, especially in the United States. Campaign funding alone gives you a very high prediction of election electoral outcome. That's massive interference, and elections anything the Russians might have done is going to be peanuts in comparison, unquote.
So talk about Russian interference is simply a joke. Furthermore, the whole discussion is completely beside the point. There is massive interference in U.S. elections from the U.S. corporate sector, who pretty much buy the elections. There's extensive research. Tom Ferguson's is by far the best. It's very extensive, shows very convincingly that you can predict the outcome of an American election in Congress and executive with remarkable precision simply by looking at the single variable of campaign funding. And that's just the beginning. Ferguson's analysis goes right through 2016, includes Congress. This goes back a long time. Of course, it's picked up a lot under the opening of the floodgates by the reactionary Supreme Court, but it goes back to the 19th century. Is that interference in elections? And that's the bare beginning. Since the 1970s, when the neoliberal assault began, the number of lobbyists in Congress has just skyrocketed. Normal representative in Congress may spend several hours a day just talking to donors to try to get funds for the next election so he has a chance of running. Meanwhile, the lobbyists are meeting with his staff, bringing all of their huge resources, which of course overwhelm the staff, and pretty much writing the legislation. Is that interference with elections? I mean, what's being discussed is not even a joke. The election system is deeply corrupted right at its core in many ways.
Chomsky mentions Thomas Ferguson, an American political scientist and author who has done extensive research on the intricate relationship between campaign funding and electoral outcome. In a January 2018 piece for the Institute of Economic Thinking, Ferguson writes, "It wasn't Comey or the Russians. Trump prevailed because his campaign carefully targeted key states with late infusions of big money from private equity, casinos, and other far-right contributors, a remarkable wave of donations from small donors, and substantial infusions from the candidate himself."
Again, it goes back to the accusation from the corporate media that Russia was, had social media trolls, that they released the emails that they possibly were working with WikiLeaks.
But now we're back to the former question. There's no evidence of any Russian effect on the presidential election, certainly none on the Senate or House elections, which went exactly the same way, and there's no charge of Russian interference. And then the rest of the story that I just mentioned about actual interference. So it's not a serious charge. I mean, there's lots of things to condemn about Trump, but not that.
You're listening to ASP Stuff Radio.
As I was wrapping up this final segment of the Alberotle Report, it was recently reported that Google is actively trying to manipulate the public into eliminating Donald Trump in 2020. According to the testimony of a Google insider, an uncovered video of a senior Google executive, and leaked documents, Google has plans to affect or influence and meddle with the outcome of the 2020 elections and, quote, prevent the next Trump situation, unquote. In the video, Jen Janai, the head of responsible innovation for Google, explained how Google will be deliberately creating algorithms in its search engine to promote liberal agendas that it favors or conforms to their standards of fairness. In addition, The Insider exposed how Google's video platform, YouTube, demotes content from conservative channels of the political right while promoting, quote, different news outlets like CNN or MSNBC or these left-leaning political outlets, unquote. Is this not clear evidence of domestic interference of our upcoming 2020 presidential election? But let's assume that Russians did in fact hack the DNC and had an immense impact on the outcome of the 2016 U.S. election. So what? Contrary to what the corporate media will report, this is not the first time that election interference has occurred by a foreign power in U.S. history. Meddling in American presidential elections can be traced as far back as 1796, where a French agent released private information to the public in order to influence the election in favor of Thomas Jefferson. Or in 1996, when the FBI discovered that the Chinese government attempted to make illegal foreign contributions to the Democratic National Committee before and during the 1996 presidential election. Now, this is not to say that the frequency of meddling in U.S. elections morally justifies or condones election interference. It's only absurd to think that Russia's interference is an historically isolated and unprecedented event. Nor should America fall prey to historical amnesia in regards to our own attempts to interfere in the elections of foreign countries. In fact, the United States is considered, quote, a world leader in the field of intervening in the internal affairs of other countries, unquote. According to Dov Levin, a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute for Politics and Strategy at Carnegie Mellon University, quote, as many as 81 times between 1946 and 2000, the United States made various attempts such as peddling misinformation or propaganda and withdrawing foreign aid to influence the elections of foreign countries. Levin's findings did not include military coups or regime change wars or attempts to undermine a presidency following an election. One memorable example of America's meddling shenanigans occurred during Bill Clinton's presidency when the White House and President Bill Clinton personally mounted a massive campaign effort to interfere in Russia's 1996 election when Boris Yeltsin was running against the country's most favored communist leader, Gennady Zyuganov, who was financially supported by Vladimir Putin, the same Putin who was accused of meddling with the 2016 U.S. presidential election against Hillary Clinton, Bill's wife. And yes, the irony is thick. Ultimately, Bill Clinton succeeded in manufacturing the re-election of Boris Yeltsin. There is an amusing Hollywood movie about this meddlesome affair called Spinning Boris, as well as a detailed cover story in the July 15, 1996 edition of Time magazine entitled Yanks to the Rescue, the secret story of how American advisors helped Yeltsin win. Here's a clip of Dr. Levin providing another example of U.S. election interference.
Well, one example of such intervention occurred in Italy in 1948, where the United States was worried about the possibility of the Communist Party winning the election there. So we basically did everything, including throwing the kitchen sink in order to prevent it from winning the election. Everything from increasing our aid to the Italian government, to threatening that all aid to Italy would be cut off in case that the Communist Party would win, to giving very large amounts of covert campaign funding to the Christian Democratic Party, to designing campaign materials for the Christian Democrats and other techniques.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably. But it was for the good of the system in order to avoid the communists from taking over. For example, in Europe, in 47, 48, 49, the Greeks and the Italians, we
don't do that now, though? We don't mess around in other people's elections, Jim?
Only for a very good cause.
Can you do that? Do a Vine video on a former CIA director.
Only for a very good cause in the interests of democracy.
All right, thanks for being here.
Part 16. Conclusion.
The walls appear to be closing in on the president.
The investigative walls are closing in.
He feels the walls closing in.
The walls are closing in.
The walls were never closing in on Trump because there were no walls. The Trump-Russia collusion conspiracy was a botched insurance policy or disinformation campaign propagated by big corporate media and politically exploited by the Democratic Party. John Brennan and his corrupt minions, led by a presidential authority, was likely the mastermind behind the malicious plot, who was also working with members of British and Australian intelligence to help establish the false collusion scandal in an effort to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election against Trump or delegitimize a Trump presidency. An act that is, in Brennan's own words, nothing short of treasonous. To appreciate the motivation behind the Russiagate scandal, one only has to consider that Trump was a real threat to the U.S. political establishment and elite globalists. He was, as Jeff Carlson of the Epoch Times states, a, quote, political outsider who held no traditional allegiances. He was brash and boastful. He ignored political correctness. He could not be bought, and he did not care what others thought of him. He trusted himself, unquote. Jeff Carlson's claim does have merit, for Trump did challenge the political agenda, special interests, and regulations of Congress, the United Nations, and the European Union. In particular, Trump has been thwarting the Democrats' efforts to secure a new class of voters, namely illegal immigrants, which are paramount in the upcoming 2020 election. But more boldly, Trump has threatened the sacred Federal Reserve monetary policy. In fact, he plans to take control of and essentially politicize the Federal Reserve by putting in members that reflect his unique monetary and economic policy. One that is, quote, anti-overregulating American industry and a threat to the cabal that has controlled the central bank for decades, unquote. Trump is treading on assassination territory because historically, almost every U.S. president who attempted to reform the monetary banking system was killed, such as Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, and John F. Kennedy. With Kennedy, he had issued Executive Order 1110, which gave the power to the United States government to issue currency, silver certificates. Ronald Reagan, which many have arguably compared to Trump, once stated on national television that the Federal Reserve is the greatest threat to the future of the United States. Was that the reason why the infamous and literally insane John Hinckley shot and wounded Reagan on live television?
President Reagan!
Back up! Get him out! Get him out! Get him out! Get him out! No! Get him out!
Other motives that many critics have argued inspired the malicious demon to employ the disinformation operation was to cover up the CIA's secret supercomputer system, the Hammer, that was used to illegally spy on thousands of American citizens, including Trump and his campaign associates, or perhaps to divert the attention of Clinton's criminal wrongdoing in her email scandal cover-up and the DNC's rigging of the primary election against Bernie Sanders, which may have led to the unsolved murder of Seth Rich and the sudden, mysterious death of Sean Lucas. Whatever the reasons may be, the Democrats believed that by investing everything in the Trump-Russian collusion conspiracy, it would ultimately undermine Trump's chances of re-election in 2020. But their plan backfired. And as Chomsky points out, since there was, quote, nothing much there, they gave Trump a huge gift. In fact, they may have handed him the next election, unquote. This concludes the Alberotle Report and ASP Stuff Radio's special 4-part series on what I hope was an informative, thought-provoking, and enlightening analysis of the corrupt origins of the Russiagate scandal. One of the objectives of the Alberotle Report is to provoke you, the listener, whatever political party you subscribe to, into doing what the fictional character Howard Beale did in the 1976 film Network. Open a window, stick your head out, and yell, "I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Mad as hell." And why should you? The government is corrupt at its core, and they do not serve your best interests. They manipulate and lie to you. They spy on you and will exploit your personal information. And they will do whatever it takes to influence our own elections when they make you think that your vote counts. But it doesn't. In fact, you're better off not voting. Most disturbingly, and quite paradoxically, they imprison and silence people like Julian Assange, who expose their war crimes. With that emboldened spirit, I encourage you to reveal the truth about this fraudulent disinformation campaign to all of your friends and family, co-workers, and neighbors. Always critically evaluate the claims of the politically biased corporate media, regardless of your political affiliation. Stay skeptical and have an eye for wonder, for without wonder, truth remains hidden. And with that, this is ASP Stuff Radio. I call stuff up.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
What we've seen to this actions of, we call it the deep state here, these vested political interests that cross both parties, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. What we've seen in terms of the weaponization by the last administration, particularly of our laws, of our national security laws, and our technological resources, to actually weaponize them and target the opposition party's presidential candidate is unprecedented. I will tell you, I've been watching politics for over 40 years, since Nixon resigned, since I was a teenager. I have never seen anything close to the crimes that were committed by trying to take out Donald Trump as a presidential candidate, and then once he was elected, duly elected by the American people, to try to have him removed. Ultimately, this is an ongoing coup. This is a coup among an elite cadre of top officials in the Obama administration to undermine first the candidacy of the opposition party candidate and then the very presidency itself. This is the worst crime in American history. We have not seen a political crisis in America like this since 1860, since the beginning of the Civil War. And I would argue that the players, the perpetrators of this attempted coup of Donald Trump are less honorable than the Confederates in the Civil War, because at least they openly declared their hostility to an incoming Republican president. These people didn't even have the decency to do that. They were like rats inside the apparatus, the government apparatus, using their powers, which were immense, their technological powers, and the national security laws like the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is a highly intrusive form of surveillance, using those to go after essentially half of the American people, the candidate representing half the American people. It is just unheard of. It's unprecedented. If the American Republic, as it was constituted, fails, then the world will go dark. I think that America represents, has always represented for a couple hundred years, this notion that the individual has sovereignty over the government. The individual has primacy in our culture. We have tremendous respect, we always have in this country, for the rights, the inherent rights of the individual, which are enshrined in our founding documents, of course. And what we've been seeing with this coup against Donald Trump, regardless of what you think of him or his policies or his personality, it doesn't matter. It's this notion that if you don't like the other party's candidate, then you can use the tools, the political and the national security apparatus to your advantage to take out that candidate. That is shocking to a level that I that I cannot sufficiently convey. And I will continue to repeat this until every American gets the message that we have a huge crisis in this country right now. The world will go dark.
If you enjoy our show, please support us at aspstuffradio.com or directly at paypal.me/aspstuffradio. Donate. Thank you for your support and thank you for listening. Listening.